Hi everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the opening statement. This will be a component of our upcoming mock trial. As you know, we have the class divided into two groups, and each group has a prosecution and defense component. During the course of the semester, we've talked about criminal law, we've talked about the components of the trial, and now let's start talking about the individual components that make up the trial process. In the opening statement, your goal is to provide the jury with an idea of where the case is going. It's been referred to as a roadmap, outline. These are the kind of things you're thinking about as you prepare your opening statement. The first thing you need to remember and keep in mind is the opening statement is not a chance to argue your case. You're not in the opening statement with the idea of telling people how they should interpret the evidence. Think of this merely as presenting how the evidence will be given to the jury. Also keep in mind that this is the first time the jury is going to have a chance to really see you as a person, with a personality. It's very important that there is some connection between the jury and the lawyers. And the lawyers will really work at trying to make sure that this is achieved beginning at the opening statement. So let's talk about some steps in preparation. We talked about in criminal law the idea of elements. Each crime contains elemental components. The prosecution must produce or meet the burden of proof for each and every element. Of course, that burden of proof is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The next thing you should think about is breaking out your crime. We have two separate crimes in the mock trials. The first one is the officer-involved shooting, where the officer is now being prosecuted for attempt murder. The second mock trial is the fraternity incident that may or may not involve hazing and the wrongful death of one of the pledges, and now the pledge master is being prosecuted for negligent homicide. Take a look at the crimes. I've given you our version of the law for mock trial purposes. Break out the elements and decide what you need to prove. Your next step is to go through each of the witnesses and see how those witnesses will help your case. Now, each side has several witnesses, both for the defense and the prosecution. In both cases, you've got issues of fact that either prove the crime or provide a defense or make it difficult for the prosecution to prove the crime. Understand what your team is trying to prove. Are they trying to prove a particular crime, or are they trying to prove an affirmative defense? Once you have the elements, you understand the direction that your case is going, you understand how your witnesses are going to respond. The next thing to do would be to examine what the other side's witnesses will do. What are they going to say? What are they going to tell you? How are they going to hurt your case? Now remember, from the PowerPoint presentation, you can't talk about credibility of witnesses. You can't talk about evidence which you don't know for sure will be presented. You can't talk about illegally seized evidence. Several things you must consider, but understanding what the other side's goal is and what case they'll attempt to produce is really important for you. Now the next step, if you were, would be to sit down and determine a story. What's your story going to be? Many students really struggle with the idea of a story, and they take the script or the problem and basically just read it back. That doesn't connect well with the jury, and you want to try to make that connection. Which brings us to the next point. Have some personality. Try to connect with the jury. Don't just read something you've written down. Try to give that to the jury in a fashion that they will connect with. It's a very important part of this, and a very important part of the trial process. So the last few tips I've got are things to think about is make sure that you understand the areas that you cannot go into, that you need to avoid, the golden rule, those areas. Understand the difference between providing a story, telling what your side or your witnesses are going to say. Avoid the idea of trying to, or repeatedly telling the jury, the evidence will show. With those things in mind, I think you're going to have a good time in mock trial, and that's the first component.